Hi, my name is Sammy Bradar, Associate Editor for the National Provisioner. We're here today with Anne-Marie Roerink, Principal at 210 Analytics. We're here today to discuss the power of meat and do a bit of a follow-up from the annual meat conference. So thank you for meeting with me today, Anne-Marie.
Well, thanks so much for having me. Looking forward to it.
Yes, absolutely. So first question I have for you is, in the Power of Meat study, you said that most meals at home contain meat despite these inflationary pressures that consumers are dealing with right now. So how are consumers still incorporating meat into their meals despite these price issues?
Yeah, no, this is a really, I think, important finding because, if you just listen to the consumer media, you would think that hardly anybody eats meat anymore, just from an ethical point of view or the popularity of plant-based or all these different reasons that are coming up, and certainly inflation being one of them. In reality, what we're seeing is the vast majority of Americans love meat and poultry and integrate it into their meals, even more so than they did a couple of years ago. And doesn't mean they buy the exact same thing, doesn't mean that they buy the same quantities, but certainly historically, we've always seen that between 8 and 9% or 80 and 90% of dinners contained a portion of meat and poultry. So we're not looking for pepperoni on pepperoni pizza. We're looking for actually something you buy in the meat department. And so those numbers are the same the way they always were. And we are seeing a little bit of a shifting back and forth to your point with inflation. So we might see a little bit more chicken popping up because of the cost per pound being so much more favorable than some of the other proteins. We see a grinds coming up really, really strong, which I think has a lot to do with inflation, but also the innovation within grinds, where we see blended items like veal and beef or pork and beef. We see items that are pre-marinated, ready for tacos, those kinds of things. So I think it's really the combination of making budget work, looking for something different, the innovation in the space, but also definitely the balance between budget and time and, just something that tastes great.
Yeah, definitely. So talking about inflation a little bit more, you said in your findings from the study, excuse me, that meat inflation prices were below the rate of total food and beverages. So how is the meat category able to keep these prices lower than other categories?
Well, I think first of all, you got to look a little bit more at what is behind that math, right? So if you look for total food and beverages, you're looking at 12% year on year and 30% compared to February 2020, which was the last pre-pandemic month. So, that 30% is just simply taking an enormous bite out of people's ability to spend. And that's the pressure that we're seeing right now. So, relative to meat and poultry, we are seeing lower percentages. But if you look at it from a price per unit or a price per pound, we're sitting a little bit higher. So, even though our percent is lower, people are still laying out significantly more money. So, it really is a numbers game to an extent. But I would also say that the entire supply chain has been working together and getting creative on maybe having some smaller portions, on running sales specials where possible, running shorter sales sessions. And so what we're seeing is consumers being extremely savvy to pounce on when something is on sale, maybe stocking up when there's BOGOs, and all of that ultimately keeps that price per pound that people are paying in the store down compared to some areas that have not been able to promote the way meat and poultry have.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for that. I also remember you said that 2.4 billion shifted away from supermarkets, and I know those shifted to, other like clubs and things like that. So where exactly are these dollars shifting to, and why is that shift happening away from supermarkets?
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked that question because it is such an important finding, and it's something that IRI, now Circana, has been tracking for a while. And if you think about the rich history of the power of meat, or really any consumer research that's been happening for a while, what you're seeing is very different engagement in terms of channels across the generations. So the boomer generation was always the bigger spender, and really for 30 years has determined what the meat landscape looks like. Well, the boomer generation loves shopping at full service counters, love shopping at supermarkets. So that's really driving that strength in supermarkets over the last 10, 15, 20, 30 years. Now you look at where the store development is happening. Well, an Aldi is gearing up very, very quickly, adding nearly 1,000 stores every single year. Walmart continues to expand. So in part, it is the number of stores that are being added in some of these channels, but in part, it's also exactly those demographics. Because as the dollar is shifting away from boomers towards Gen X, millennials, and Gen Z, they do not necessarily always shop at that supermarket channel. In fact, if you look at millennials, they way over index for Walmart, for Target, for Aldi, etc. And that's exactly where the dollars are moving because they are in the mind of the millennial, easier to shop. They offer a great value proposition, and they're just not as focused on that full service counter than what we see among the boomers. So it really is in part related to inflation. Shop at a channel that makes it easy. I don't have to search for what BOGO is on sale. Everything is always everyday low price kind of thing. So in part it's inflation, it's part in demographics, and in part it's certainly store development as well.
Certainly. Yeah. Looking at those demographics, I know as the dollars are shifting to those younger generations, millennials and Gen Z, I know that older generations typically have more favorability of the meat counter. So what sort of future do you see for the meat counter?
Yeah, I recently did a massive research project into that the middle of last year. And in a way, I was maybe expecting it to be a slam dunk to say, we really don't need them. It's a very small part of sale. A lot of younger shoppers have literally never gone there. But it ended up not being as much of a slam dunk as I thought it would be. Because, yes, it really is a small part of sales, at most about 5% for most stores. And people tend to really rarely use them except for a couple of loyalists, but it is really those special occasions when people do go to the counter. So Father's Day, maybe Labor Day, Memorial Day grill sets, if they want a steak or a roast, if they want advice. And so that is really where a store can set itself apart. So even though from a sales number perspective, it's not necessarily a huge benefit anymore, it is a huge benefit in order to differentiate your store from another and in order to engage with consumers. So what we see is if consumers only buy from the meat case, the self-service meat case, they tend to only buy a handful of different items because they are very much on that routine. I always buy chicken breast, I always buy ground beef, whatever, right? Throw it in their cart and off they go. But what we're seeing is if a person actually gets advice from somebody, they're very willing to take it. And as a result, people buy across more cuts and kinds, and they end up buying more meals worth as well. So it's really playing into that engagement with the consumer, with the reputation of the store. And I think in order to be able to move away from the counters, which are difficult to do in terms of shrink, labor, etc., retailers are really trying to figure out how else can I engage and how else can I still remain that special destination when people need something for a special occasion or advice, tips, what cut to buy, how to prepare it, etc. So still a lot to come on that one, I would say.
Definitely. I remember you talking during the Power of Meat at the AMC about retailers building trust with consumers and establishing a good reputation. So how can retailers build that trust with their audience, with their consumers, and establish a solid reputation for their store as a whole?
Yeah, I would say, especially during these times of high inflation, you just see a lot of focus on quality hand in hand with price. So, really, that idea of value. And, consumers just almost had a high level of being upset if they had bought something and spent their money on it and it wasn't a good eating occasion. And I think oftentimes we forget about that, the taste of it, the flavor of it, the memory of just serving a wonderful meal to your family. And so, I think bringing in that favorability is really important, hand in hand with affordability, hand in hand with, what, you will not waste your money when you buy it here. Will help you prepare a wonderful meal. And that's really in part too what goes into that service. It's not just fulfilling the order, but it's also the post retailing, I call it, which is really about helping consumers do something with the meat regardless of what contraption they use, whether that's a skillet or the oven or their beloved air fryer. Mm-hmm. And I think we're going to see a lot more engagement from retailers, really selling the meal, if you will, than selling just the meat. And that's where I think the key lies.
Okay, thank you for that. Excuse me. So looking at meat alternatives in a sort, plant-based we know is kind of on the decline. They're trying to innovate, get those flavors back up, not back up, but getting to match their meat counterparts. But looking at cultivated meat, I know that there's such mixed opinions and mixed reactions for that. So what sort of future do you see for cultivated meat?
Yeah, so on the one hand, production is not anywhere near a point where we can expect it in stores anytime soon. So for that perspective, I think the market still has a lot of time to continue to build on a more positive consumer sentiment. But certainly I remember asking the question on the survey 10, 15 years ago, and it was a good 60, 70% of people said, oh, I am not trying that. Last year it was, and it continues to go down. Like this year, it was only about 40% of people who said, I don't think so, with gigantic generational differences. And that's really what I think is important to keep in mind. Will you get a boomer to try it? Probably not. But if you look at especially people who have some concern about eating meat and poultry, animal products, a lot of times it's related to the environment, related to animal welfare, related to, the use of maybe antibiotics or hormones, what have you. And a lot of those shoppers absolutely believe that cultivated meat might be an answer. Now, a lot of them also say, well, don't want to be a guinea pig. We'll give it a couple of years. But certainly, I think cultivated meat is going to continue to develop, get to a price point that is acceptable, work on that whole safety aspect, and continue to win over some hearts among those, especially, I would say, with animal welfare concerns.
Yeah, definitely. So it's less of the health focus and more of the welfare, sustainability, those types of reasons. Okay.
Yeah, and I do think, though, that is a massive call out to the meat industry, right? We know everything that happens on the farms, on the ranches, in transportation, et cetera. And there's massive efforts there to make the life of the animal as good as it can be, including that final day. But we really have a big opportunity to continue to educate people about everything we do relative to the planet, the animal, the community, the worker, and sort of take that advantage away from the cultivated meat story a little bit, to say you really don't have to feel guilty about eating meat and poultry because there's no concern necessary.
Definitely. That's great. So another point that you had made during your presentation was that there's opportunity to increase consumers in the meat department by bringing it into other areas of the store, aside from just the meat case and just the meat department. So how can retailers bring more meat products into other areas of the store?
Yeah, and this is really a lesson that comes out of what we call the traditional CPG categories, consumer packaged goods. So if you think about candy, for instance, and you think about an Easter or Valentine's Day, you see these displays popping up everywhere. And you stand at checkout and you see the Valentine's heart box of chocolate, and you're like, oh, yes, I need that. And certainly a lot of other categories do that as well. So it's really, while you're shopping for one thing, you end up buying something else because a secondary display reminds you. And in meat, we've never really done that. You either make it to the back of the store to buy your meat and poultry, or, you just run in for your gallon of milk and you don't come anywhere near to the department. So what we're seeing is that a lot of the best in class retailers are not necessarily only merchandising meat in the meat department, but really creating these meal stations, for instance, where I'm in the Publix market. You walk in and there's always a small refrigerator right by the door that has all the items, the protein, the veg, and the side for an entire meal. So now I haven't even gotten to the produce department yet or any other department, but I already have a meal idea with all the items right there. And so secondary displays from every single category are proven to work. The issue is, we're refrigerated, so you can't put it everywhere. You have to have refrigerators that go in other parts of the store, but also the labor. And stores have just still a lack of labor. If items have to come from different departments, who is responsible for that? So oftentimes these meal bunkers, for instance, or secondary displays work beautifully, but if nobody continues to stock them during the day and they're empty by 1 p.m., what do you do? And so operationally, they tend to be a big challenge, but they certainly do work. And I think a lot of retailers are working with manufacturing companies of refrigerating units. You know, how do you bring something smaller in there? What is best in class? We see a lot of mix and match promotions now where let's just say buy 3 packages for $20 and there's a variety of different sides, a variety of produce items, a variety of meats. And then the other thing I'm seeing is what I call the virtual cross merchandising. For instance, I saw one retailer putting up signage if you were in hamburger buns or the mustard area or lettuce that you could put on a hamburger. And everywhere that you went along your burger journey, there was reminders to buy beef for the burger and have a wonderful grilling experience at home. So whether you're buying bread, condiments, produce, there was that reminder that burgers make for a fantastic dinner. So that's a little bit easier to do, but then stores have to overcome what we call clean store policies, where a lot of them don't like signage everywhere and those extra displays everywhere. So it's really the creativity that works, but oftentimes it's the operational and policies that stand in the way of it.
Yeah, definitely. In my local stores, I've noticed a lot more signage and promotions, even with the meat counter saying like, you know, we can cut your meat for you here at the counter, all those types of things. So I'm definitely noticing an increase in those types of advertisements, if you will. So
Yeah, no, that's wonderful to see because I do think it's about not just making the meat available, but truly moving to a sales model and really engaging with consumers to make sure that meat always ends up in that shopping basket.
yeah, definitely. So this is actually my last question for you, but looking at promotions for retailers, what kind of promotions will be most effective for retailers in this upcoming year in 2023?
So the consumer eye is on sales, regardless of the category that I look at. And, you know, it goes back to that inflationary piece. They are paying 30% more today than they were prior to the pandemic, and very few people are making 30% more. So first and foremost, they are just looking what is on sale. So any which way in which we can answer that call and help consumers with figuring out to stretch their meat and meal dollars a little bit is important. And that might just simply be having to move to 1 day sales or 3 day sales or sales over the weekend and rotate through more items that are on sale. Maybe it's a different type of BOGO. So if you can't afford to do a buy one, get one, it might be a BOGO that's buy one, get one 40% off, or buy two and get one off. So again, a lot of creativity out there. I see internationally some retailers moving to what we call dynamic pricing, where you simply look at the date on the package. And if it's before a certain date, it's one price. If it's after a certain date, it's another. So it's almost like a proactive markdown, if you will, to try and push things. We see people point out that there was deflation in the market. You know, it's now 25% less than it was in November 22, for instance. So just tremendous creativity out there. And from a consumer perspective, they always love the price off per pound so that they have a lot of flexibility. Certainly BOGOs have come out of nowhere over the last 10 years and have really made deep inroads into the meat department, especially if it's mix and match BOGOs. But I would say at the end of the day, whatever way retailers can figure out how to get in front of their shoppers and help them with their budget is greatly appreciated and will move the needle.
Definitely. Definitely. I agree 100%. Well, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it. It was very insightful to get this follow-up with you. I'm Sammy Bradar, Associate Editor for the National Provisioner, and I've spoken today with Anne Marie Roerink, Principal of 210 Analytics. Thank you.